Hey, welcome back. Today we're going to look at the harmonic advancement of the two Harmony characters, Bronya and Sparkle. This is key because both of them both pull up your DPS to make them move faster, but they contrast because they have various skill points, advantages and disadvantages, and rotation. So we'll take a look at that. So first, Bronya's skill is a 100% advancement, allowing them to move immediately. Now this is optimal to move just after the unit has moved. So after they've crossed the line, then they have the full track that they would normally have to traverse. However, Bronya will just allow it to move instantly. So the optimal placement of the skill should be right after the DPS has moved. Secondly, we'll get into this later, is that the Bronya talent actually gives a 30% self-advancement on basic, which allows Bronya to move faster herself. Sparkle, on the other hand, doesn't do a 100% advancement, it just does a 50% advancement. So you can get the full potential of the 50% advancement when you're on the top half of the track, because you can move to the bottom half. If you're beyond 50%, you would only get sent to take the action immediately, but you would be losing out on some potential. So ideally, skilling if they have 50% left to advance is quite good. And if you pair that with going from 100% to 50% and then 50% to going immediately, this is a nice cycle that we can take advantage of. So comparing, there are two harmony types. There's a consonant harmony, which is agreeable and similar frequencies, and that's the idea that the harmony and the DPS have the same speed. So common words is a slow version, or the -1 speed, where the harmony is just following the DPS. A dissonant harmony is a jarring or cacophonous frequencies that don't quite fit together. Well, in this term, this is where the harmony and the DPS have vastly different speeds. Namely, the harmony is running much faster, and they're pretty much putting as much speed as possible into themselves. So, Bronya and Sparkle can both run a consonant harmony and also a dissonant harmony cycles. We'll take a look. The first one is Bronya's consonant harmony. This is probably the one most people are familiar with the DPS just slightly faster than Bronya, or Bronya just under it. So after the DPS takes their turn and takes action, Bronya follows right after and reduces their next 100% turn to 0, allowing them to take action immediately. So their attack frequency is twice that of the speed of Bronya, because Bronya is the limiting reagent on this one. And you could expect your output, just based on frequency alone, to double with Bronya on the team. Sparkle, however, does not do 100% advancement, but if you run it just under the DPS, you can still get a similar thing. Instead of reducing the second attack down to 0, it reduces it only 50%, which they will attack. But after Sparkle gets the next turn, their third turn, the DPS has actually waited 50% of their turn, and Sparkle will reduce that 50% down to 0, and they can attack immediately. So for every 2 Sparkle activities, the DPS gets to attack 3 times. So their attack frequency has increased by 1.5 times, or 3 halves. So your ideal output based on frequency is 1.5 times. So if I were to put this on a table, this is just with the consonant harmonics, where Bronya does do a greater output multiplier just based on frequency alone. However, the big cost of Bronya is that there is a much higher skill point cost. Bronya has to take a skill, and the DPS has to act twice during that same orbit, or when all your units take action. So traditionally, X is 1 for DPSs that use their skill. If you're using a more skill point friendly one like Jinglu, who uses half, or Blade, who uses a quarter, that's much more affordable, in the range of 1.5 to 2. However, Imbibitor Lunae brings this total skill point use per orbit to 7, which is much higher and harder to compensate. Sparkle, using this harmonic, does not call for the DPS to act as frequently, so it is only 1.5. If we consider more on their skill point usages, we want to look at their rotations or their 3-turn ults. How do they act over 3 turns if we include the ult? So Bronya at E0 S0, they will not get any advantage with the skill points. It's a straight 3 times multiplier. However, Sparkle, upon ulting, they actually give the skill points of 4. So the cost is actually reduced by 4. So 1.5 does triple to 4.5. However, once we subtract 4, we get -1. So Sparkle is quite a lot more skill point efficient and granting than Bronya. And that's the main difference between how the frequency corresponds with the cost. Bronya, however, does have opportunities to improve. So at E0 S0, we have the standard. However, once you give it the light cone, every other ultimate grants a skill point back. So every ultimate you can expect to grant 0.5 skill points back. So it reduces it from 3 to 2.5. The E1 reduces it further because every time you skill, you only have to you may recover a skill point. So I can expect to reduce that from a 1 to a 0.5. If I combine the two with reducing the E1 and the S1, I'm at a 0.5 per orbit, and I get to reduce half per rotation. I get a much more affordable 1/3 plus 2x per orbit, which is not as kind as Sparkle. However, it's much more affordable, and in short fights may still be usable. So if we move on, let's consider the dissonant harmonies. Dissonant harmonies are when the support is much faster. And in this case, if the support Bronya takes their whole turn and then does a basic attack at the end, they will actually be advanced 30%. So they only have to take 70% of their next one. So if we meet the condition that Bronya is less than 1.7 times their DPS, they will still get the similar thing where when the DPS goes, Bronya will be right behind to scale it back up. So with this, we can actually still get the 2 times multiplier times the standard speed of the DPS. For practical sense, if the DPS is at 100 speed, Bronya should be about 170 speed. With a Sparkle's dissonant harmony, we can run a pretty aggressive move, where if Sparkle takes their whole turn, and the DPS has only gone through 50%, Sparkle can pull it up immediately and allow the DPS to go. So this is valid as long as Sparkle is less than twice the speed of the DPS. And your output multiplier can go up to twice the speed of the DPS. This is pretty advantageous because it's always scaling onto the DPS and they're always receiving the buffs. However, Sparkle's speed needs to be on the order of 200 if your DPS's speed is 100. So these dissonant frequencies have a lot of advantage. The SP use for Bronya reduces from the 1, and it actually makes it neutral, only costing from the DPS's use. Likewise, a dissonant Sparkle will increase your output from 0.5 to double. However, how likely is it that we can get these dissonant speeds? Honestly, it's pretty hard to get above 170 speed. With the unit's base speed, speed boots, the messenger set of +6, and if each of your relics get on average 1 speed stat, 2 speed stats, 3 speed stats, between 3 and the 4th speed stat, is when you can achieve the 170 speed. So it's not impossible, but it's quite unlikely for you to achieve such high numbers. So for dissonant Bronya, it is possible if the DPS has no speed and the DPS doesn't have speed boots. However, a dissonant Sparkle to expect double speed is pretty unreasonable. Even Clara at 90 speed, who's the slowest unit currently in the game, does not want to be fast and attack more often. Most damage comes from the counter. So even that is very difficult. You can run a dissonant Sparkle with 70% speed and get a 70% frequency increase, but you are missing out a little bit. So last to consider with the harmonics is how do they work with the skill uptime? I won't go through exact calculations on how the crit rate and damage ratios and attack changes, but for Bronya, with the skill uptime, the DPS unit is always moving once, and then Bronya pulls them up and gives them the skill buff. So every cycle, they are only getting it half the time, regardless of their running consonant or dissonant style. The ult uptime, however, is different. Because dissonant Bronya gets to take more actions between their moves with the basic and the skill, she can ult every other turn, and it gets a much higher ult frequency, so you can expect the buff to be on Bronya about half the time. With a consonant Sparkle, the skill is 2/3 on the unit because Sparkle skills twice for every 3 DPS actions, while a dissonant Sparkle will always skill and pull up the DPS, so it will be on 100% of the time. The ultimate uptime, however, is even higher on dissonant Sparkle because they take more actions, and the more actions they take in that frequency, they get to have more uptime because Sparkle's actions match the DPS's actions. But as a result, there is a cost to having a Sparkle run at such a fast rate, in which if you scale the skill point cost with the ult, it becomes 2x plus 2/3, which is still manageable for some. However, it is a bit more expensive than if you run a consonant Sparkle. There is one other technique with E2 Bronya who gives 30% after a skill. So a 30% speed after is approximately 30 speed for 100 speed DPSs. So as long as your Bronya is less than 30 plus your DPS speed, you can still run a similar thing. However, your output changes because your upper limit, which is normally bound by your Bronya's speed, is actually increased more. So before you would only expect double. However, if you're running a 135 DPS and your Bronya's 165, your output frequency goes from ×2 to ×2.44. I think this actually leads to two transient solutions. So traditionally, if you're running a dissonant Bronya and you both have 134 speed, you can do 4 attacks in the first cycle. However, with the DPS and Sparkle, both above 134, you can only do 3 attacks in the first cycle. This is because for every 2 Sparkle actions, your DPS can only go 3 times. And I think there's a special technique where Sprightly Von Whack can advance that unit by 40%. So I think this will be useful for Bronya because they can harmonize faster with their unit, because initially Bronya is slightly faster by about 30 speed than your DPS unit. So if you harmonize faster, you can get into your rotation. Now, there are some ideas that's like, wow, we have 2 advancement characters. Can we use them both? Unfortunately, the common use you cannot use it with a consonant Sparkle. You're going to be trapped in a situation where Bronya will pull up 50% instead of 100%. So if we take this example, the DPS goes, takes their action, Bronya immediately pulls them up a second time. If Sparkle pulls them up 50%, that's great. They will attack. However, the next part is when the DPS and Bronya meet. Bronya has no choice but to pull up that unit by the full amount. However, the DPS has just already weighted 50%. Bronya is now doing a suboptimal pull up and is thus not a great strategy. This is because Sparkle uses 2 DPS cycles in order to run a full period. Their harmonics are over 2 turns. It is possible with Dissonant Sparkle because Dissonant Sparkle does run over one of the DPS turns. However, as spoken about earlier, it's difficult due to speed requirements. So, at the end of the day, we have a lot. But I hope this guide gives you a good understanding on how the 2 speedy action advanced units work. So, as a final mastery follow-up, I propose this question. If you have an E2 Bronya using Sprightly Von Whack, what speed does the DPS need to be in order to run a consonant harmonic and go 5 times in the first cycle? I ask 5 times because traditionally it's very common with the 134 to go 4 times in the first cycle. But if I want that 5th time and that Sprightly Von Whack is pulling my Bronya up a little bit more, maybe they can really go 5 times. What speed requirement is this? And of course, assume skill point abundance. So, I thank everyone for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and follow for more.